All right. Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 5:59, actually, and acknowledge that tonight's meeting is being held on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw people. Is there anybody who has any questions about before we start, about how to use these new microphones that we have in front of us? Is everybody clear on how they work? Because I think... Okay, great. Okay. Oh. Okay. Shall we wait and give them a couple more minutes then?
It's up to you.
Let's... Pardon? Yes, that'd be great. Okay, we'll have a 2-minute break while we go see if the superintendent is available. And again, we'd like to recognize that tonight's meeting is being held on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw people. Do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda? Trustee McKay.
Let's see if I can find the number. So, 9.1.
Yes.
I would move that we delete that from the correspondence. The
Okay.
motion that was passed at the regular board meeting was that we get a report back from staff, which we have under 8.1.
Yeah.
And so it would actually include that business.
Okay, so do we need a seconder for that? Trustee Keller? All in favor? Oh, you may. Yeah, you may.
So just a point of information, I'm wondering if we have a pre-stated plan or a part of our previous motion about how we were reporting back to the community on that. If there was going to be a response to the letter.
Okay, through me, Trustee McKay, if you could respond to that as the chair.
So, no, the motion from the regular board meeting was to refer it here, and then, and the motion would be fulfilled by the presentation. That was it was referred to come here for a staff report, and so by providing the staff report under 8.1, it would fulfill the motion on the correspondence that was passed at the regular board meeting.
Thanks. Trustee Higginson.
So, my intention on voting in favor of moving this to the business committee meeting was to hear information so that we would know what the correct way to respond was. So I don't feel that just moving it here fulfills the requirements. I also know that there are members of the community who wrote this letter in the audience because they came to the last meeting where we received it, and I think we have a responsibility to discuss their questions in the letter, or at least make sure that we refer it here to the right places after hearing about this issue. So I won't be voting in favor of removing it.
Okay.
Because then it also doesn't fulfill the requirements of referring it here if it gets then removed from the agenda.
Okay. Anybody else want to speak to this before we vote? I think for me, the one thing I'll speak my thoughts. I can see both sides because I am wondering if by virtue of hearing that presentation, things may come out of that presentation that may result in motions or notices of motion that will address the concerns in the letter anyway. So I'm of two minds in terms of this motion. So having said that, Trustee Stanley.
Chair, I am not in favor of removing this from the agenda for the exact reasons that Trustee Higginson said. I do think that it is important to discuss how that we can send information to the community.
Okay. All right. Anything, Trustee Bear?
Thank you. I'm just trying to understand the process here. So we had, thank you. We had correspondence brought to our regular board meeting. The motion that was brought forward as a result of that correspondence was for the discussion to come to this meeting. And so if that's the process that we've decided as a board, what is the existing standing of where in there do we make a decision around the correspondence? That's what I'm trying to figure out, because it feels like when we normally have correspondence, we decide refer to staff, we decide what we're going to do with it, but now we've said bring it to this meeting. And so I feel like there's two separate issues here. We have a report coming back from staff, which is going to be helpful for us to be able to make decisions. Will we have an opportunity to also make a decision around what we should be doing with that correspondence? And are the two interconnected? I'm just hoping for some clarification.
Trustee Higginson.
So normally when something is referred to another meeting, the decision on how to respond, that is usually made at the board meeting, when we go through all of our correspondence, that decision is then made after hearing the necessary information in order to be able to provide a decision on how to respond. So that's why it's on the agenda under 9.1, or whatever it is, to be able, as unfinished business, for us to be able to decide how we would like to respond to the correspondence.
Okay, Trustee Barron and then Trustee O'Neill, and then I'm going to call the question.
So my question is then, should it not be a change of order rather than a deletion from the agenda, and that we should be having the correspondence discussion after the presentation from staff and not before?
You could make that motion after we...
It's already on there?
It's already after.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Trustee O'Neill.
Thanks. I guess So just so I'm understanding this, there was a motion at the last meeting to refer a discussion or have staff come back and do a report on this, not to have a debate and discussion on the actual correspondence itself.
I am not certain I can answer. All right, I'll defer and ask,
And-
let the chair answer that because I wasn't at the meeting. So to the chair, or to Ms. McKay.
The motion was that the Board of Education of School District 68 refer the above correspondence to the November Business Committee for an update from staff, which was carried unanimously.
Yes.
Sorry.
Oh, no, Trustee O'Neill, did you want to follow up on that?
Yes, so I guess for myself, I'm questioning why we would be then having a discussion on the correspondence itself. That motion spoke to us getting further information, not to dealing with the correspondence. Did we not deal with the correspondence at that meeting? Okay,
Okay.
so this body would then be making a recommendation
Yes.
to the regular meeting to address that correspondence.
Okay. Yes, so having heard that, I'm going to call for a vote. All those in favor of deleting item 9.1? Trustee McKay? All right, all opposed? All right, motion's defeated. Thank you. Okay, given that, may I have a motion to approve the agenda? Trustee Stanley and Trustee Barron. Thank you. Motion to approve, all in favor, sorry. Motion to approve the minutes of October 9th, please. Trustee Barron, Trustee Stanley. Discussion, all those in favor? Carried. Thank you. All right, so now we do have presentations. We have a senior staff report. we have a couple senior staff reports. First up is Mr. Hackwood, our Assistant Director of Planning and Operations regarding lead and water. And just a little gentle reminder, I'm going to try to keep us really on track tonight in terms of making sure everybody who wants to speak gets one chance to speak. And we all try to remember around not repeating each things that other people have said so the meeting flows a little more smoothly. Yeah.
Good evening. This is an update on where we are with the unexpected project that we're now dealing with. As people are probably aware, we were a year early on our original testing. I should actually, oops, where are we at here? Should get myself there. We're actually a year early on our original remediation works. Trustees had voted to, rather than wait the entire 3 years, to bring it up a year earlier. And we actually, there was another vote that went through that was to make sure that there was a water station in every single school throughout the district, and that was installed as well. So we were actually heading into the maintenance portion of this lead and water. We had put our remediation works in place, and we were now testing to confirm that those remediation works were actually working. So we had started in March, and we had our own staff going. It was about a $10,000 operating budget was put in place to allow our own staff to go out and do the testing. We send those samples in, and it didn't have to be a sample of the entire school. It was just a representative sample. Send those samples in, get them tested, and what we were looking at the end of that was to maybe be able to reduce our flush times. So as it stands right now, flushing occurs every day at the schools that were identified at the time as being non-compliant. It occurs every day. It's about 10 minutes, and it happens at about 7 o'clock in the morning. So what we were hoping to do is be able to ease back on some of that flushing. It's quite a bit of water. Just as we had completed our first maintenance, we were informed that the Health Canada had reduced the allowable limit of lead by half. So then at that point, it was almost a whole new game. We had to go in, start retesting. There was quite a few schools that were between the 0.05 milligrams and the 0.1 milligrams per liter that we had to retest. And a lot of those schools had remediation put in place. So and this of course was coming up in the summer. We couldn't test in the summer. It has to be when the school's active. And as the other ask that came through from the ministry was that the first go-round, the first 3-year program, didn't include schools built after 1990. So the second go-round now has to include all schools that were built after 1990. And though that was a whole new round of testing. So $55,000 was authorized through AFG to do the testing. And we're in the midst of that now. I'd say we're probably 3/4 of the way through that, through all the facilities. Now, have I made it to the next frame yet? We've made it probably about 3/4 of the way through. There's reams of data. We have an environmental engineering firm working for us. So they're going to be putting together recommendations on what to do with all this data. Exactly what the remediation works will be. We'll also, same as we had done the previous project, we hired a mechanical engineer as well. So he goes in, looks at the building, looks to see where the long runs of water come from. Typically on an older building, it's long runs that have lead solder and the copper. On the newer buildings, we're seeing that it's typically the faucets. And it appears that faucets bought right up to current day, if they sit for any period of time, will produce a lead count. Now, they had only been producing a minor one around the 0.05, 0.06 maybe, and now that's no longer compliant, so we're having to deal with all the faucets that are now failing as well. So we've been in contact with, with Island Health, and Island Health has been in contact with the ministry. We've kept them apprised of what our program is. All of our remediation is still in place, so every single drinking source through the entire district, it's not just schools, it's all facilities, you'll see it tagged with a flush for 2 minutes, first thing in the morning, and then as the day goes through, run it till it's cold before you drink it directly. And we will be going in with the with the environmental firm. We'll be working with them directly now to come up with a strategy to deal with not only the new schools, back into the schools that were remediated previously. So that still has to come forward. We have not got ourselves to the point where we know what all the answers are yet. We expect that, I'm at the last one. Where do I expect that? I expect that by April, and that's being maybe a tad conservative, but by April, we should have a plan in place. And that's the start of our AFG budget year. That's just, that's good timing for looking for funding. Because if any, I don't believe this will be as bad as the first go-around, but the first go-arounds, the first 3 years, we typically spent in the area, the realm of $100,000 each year to do the remediation works. Generally, which was replacing faucets or putting flush valves in. And I hope I didn't rush through this too quickly.
Any questions?
I should talk a little bit about correspondence, because you asked about correspondence. So what we have done, this is a long program. We've been at this now this is our 4th year. What we have typically done is if we find a school that needs remediation, we contact the principal directly. We arrange meetings with the PAC so that we can present what the results of the testing were. And we also let them know what our remediation works are going to be. So there's the big part of the ministries, this is Ministry of Education, the ministry's mandate was that you have to communicate with the public, with the school, with the students. And once we know the results, that becomes a big part of the program as well.
Okay. Trustee Barron.
Thank you through the chair. Thanks for your presentation. My question was actually speaking to what it was.
My question was, you answered part of my question where you were speaking to the fact that part of what you've been doing is speaking with schools that require remediation and ensuring that PACs are communicated with and parents and so on. What's being done for us to communicate with all parents in our communities for them to know what's happening in our schools in general? Because there seems to be some desire to know more. Is our kids' water safe? And so I guess how are we communicating to our parents and to our communities, each individual school, regardless of where they fall in requiring remediation?
So if I may, through the chair, we have to submit all our data to the Ministry of Education. So it's on their website, the data from every school. And we also submitted our data the same data we submitted to Communications. And Communications put it up on our website when we went through the first 2 years of this program. So we let the school know, the school directly lets the PAC know, we post it up on our website, and it's posted on the Ministry of Education site. And Vancouver Island Health is thoroughly involved, but our Island Health, I should say, I'm not sure that they post it.
Trustee Keller, any question?
Yes, through the chair. Thank you for the presentation. My question is through the chair. What's being done sort of in relation to Trustee Barron's question to communicate this to our students, especially our primary students, in a way that's understandable? Because I know from my perspective it's challenging for my younger child to remember to run the tap for an extended period of time. So I'm kind of wondering what are we doing, what could we be doing to communicate the message to the younger students especially?
If I may, through the chair, in facilities, we rely on the building manager to do that. A lot of the communications down through the principal. That would probably be answered by somebody that can say what they do at the school level.
Trustee Higginson. Trustee Higginson.
Just
Sorry.
Just as a point of clarification on Trustee Keller's question, my understanding is that you have to run the water source for 2 minutes in the morning once. You don't have to run the water source every time the child or anybody in the building wants to drink out of the fountain.
Through the chair, we're being extra cautious. Even the 2 minutes, we had nothing. We have now with the remediations that were in place and the new testing we did on the 1990s, we had nothing, maybe a couple of real long runs that ended up in a science wing or something like that they wouldn't have been drinking out of. Almost nothing made it to 30 seconds. So by 30 seconds, generally it was clear, but I don't like to use that number because it's not every case.
So just for a follow-up on that, can I just be clear that it's only once a day that you need to do that, or is it every time somebody's drinking out of the fountain?
The sign, which I brought a copy of it,
Yeah.
what the sign says is to run it for 2 minutes first thing.
First thing.
And then just run it till the water's cold. And generally, it's being run enough, it's always cold.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Trustee Stanley?
So thank you, sorry, through the chair. I guess I just want to follow up on Trustee Higginson's question, just because I wasn't fully understanding the answer is it a requirement, like a health requirement for it to run until it's cold? Is that like a required remediation?
The remediation was to run it for 2 minutes. And we had signage that had it running for just until it's cold afterwards through the day. And we just kept the signage the same. We were not told that we had to prove that it worked for 2 minutes, and which we did. The existing remediation, the ones that we hit that were over 2 minutes, again, these were science labs that the water's only used and probably hadn't been used for 3 years. Those are the only ones we hit that were over 3 minutes or 2 minutes. So generally the signage we expect, and that's the same. It's the same scheme that we're using with the flush valves. The flush valves flush it once in the morning. Once these flush valves are in place, we don't expect to keep that signage up. But we'll have to test to confirm that. That is a requirement by the Ministry of Health, is that we test to confirm that our remediation works are in place and are working. The project now goes into this is the maintenance phase that we started. So every 3 years you have to get through all the schools and test to confirm that your remediation works are working. Now, that's where we were, but because the level changed, it moved us into having to test and do a whole slug of remediation works again.
Okay, before I get back to, go to a few speakers who've already spoken, is there anyone who hasn't spoken who has a question? Okay, Trustee Higginson, then Trustee Keller.
Thank you, through the chair. So just in reference to, we have data from, I just want to be clear on the process that we're going through here. So we have data from not very long ago.
Correct.
But we have to retest, even though we may have data that indicates that when we tested 18 months ago and did everything, we were above. So we still have to go back and retest everything.
Through the chair, we retested because some of those schools fit under the 10 but above the 5.
Yeah, okay.
Trustee Keller?
Thank you, through the chair. It's a question for staff. I just wanted to follow up on my last question. I wanted to know a little bit more about what's being communicated to the students with respect to potential for lead content in the water.
No, I think Superintendent Saylor, you want to speak, or were you pointing to Mr.
You're pointing to
McGonigal?
me?
Yeah. I think I was actually going to point to you anyway. But
Okay, so through the chair, the basic thing that we've done at the elementary school level is that running in the morning. So if you walk by any classrooms, the teachers are running that water in the morning. And our school was one, I think we were in the first phase that was tested. So that was a couple of years ago now.
3.
I think, yeah, in that first phase. So not a lot of other communication to the students because the main thing for us was running it in the morning. And in an elementary school, I would say the water, like the sources are used really regularly.
Trustee Mayor, did you have a thought?
Yes, thank you, through the chair. A couple of questions that are interconnected. You had mentioned all of the different areas where, my phone, darn it, sorry about that. Thank you, through the chair. You'd mentioned all the different areas where information can be accessed around the current levels of lead within our schools at all these different sites. And I apologize if you said this, but I'm looking for clarification. Is there anywhere that our principals, our staff, our parents can go on, say, a school district website where all this information can be provided to them around up-to-date information around what this looks like to ensure communications are, ongoing with our parents, to support our principals to be able to communicate around what's happening in their school, where their levels are at, what's being done, if any remediation is happening. And is it all compiled somewhere that's accessible without parents and principals having to go to 10 different places and compile it to be able to know what's happening up to date?
Through the chair, one of the programs we did with this program as well was create a cheat sheet for the principals. So it was a glossy, I don't know what it was, probably 11 by 17, that had all the information on it. so that they had a place to go directly to. Now, this was, I guess we put the last of those up 2 years ago now. So they were all posted up in the administration office so that they did have a place that they could quickly know where to go to get their answers. I have not been into the schools lately to see if those still are there. And this next round, if they don't, we'll be asking them if they have them. If they don't have them, we're going to be doing the same process on this one that we did on the previous 2 phases, which was talk to the principals, see what they need. If those glossies aren't up anymore, we'll be putting them up. We'll be checking that all of their sources have the signage on them, although we just checked on that again. When we're doing the testing, we're checking to make sure that the source water does have the signage on it. So we tried to overload the information. When you look at the reams of data, that's really overwhelming. We tried to make it an easy checklist that they could send people to look for the information. And hopefully they're still there. We'll know on this next round. We'll start putting them up again.
All right, anything further from me? Yes?
Can I ask one other follow-up question?
Yes, I will.
I'm wondering, and excuse my ignorance around this, but I'm not a lead water tester. I'm curious to know where our filtered fountain stations, where they fall in this. How do they help lead and water? Do they help lead and water? I know there's a lot of conversations around parents very keen on increasing the amount of filtered water stations in their schools. How does that play into this, and does it help lead content?
Through the chair, we put stations in every school, modern ones, with both the bottle fillers and the sippy station down below. We don't use filters. We keep it usually for the first time, but we generally order them without filters. The maintenance cost on filters is outrageous. We go through a filter about once every month and a half, and they're about $175 a piece. And we're talking hundreds and hundreds of these things. So most districts have opted to go with flushing, including us.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Seeing no other questions, I'm going to say thank you, Mr. Hackwood.
Thank you.
Very enlightening, as always. And next on our agenda is item 8.2, Director of Finance Sutton. Financial update and quarter 1.
This evening, I'm going to provide a quarter report as well as some high-level information for the board and stakeholders on items that are impactful to finance. First and foremost, our 1701 data collection is now complete. That is a process that happens at September 30th. And just to summarize what you're seeing here, districts are required to submit to ministry a projected student enrollment, which is to facilitate our annual budget and the revenues that we assume for those number of students that we will receive from ministry. We then have a count 1701 data poll that ministry requires we do on September 30th that takes all of the data out of our MyEd system and compiles it, puts it into the student categories. Ministry then provides us with a per pupil rate, and that then confirms our operating budget. So from our preliminary operating budget based on projected enrollment to our what will be our amended budget based on our actual 1701 confirmed data. So page 13 of 30 of your agendas is a summarized sheet of where we are now, our actual FTE that just came through on the data count, our budgeted FTE that was within our annual budget, the overall change in FTE, which is 176.608 FTE, and that converts to $2.9 million. Those monies have now been absorbed into the budget to mitigate the increased levels of staffing that we put into place in the month of September for the increased enrollment, as well as the increased school resources that are required as well for those increase of students, for the increased number of students with unique needs, average teacher salary increase, and other shifts and changes that are required, such as ratification of the QB collective agreement and the 2% increase there. So all of those items have been updated accordingly. on page 14 of 30, classroom enhancement update. Ministry has originally provided 90% of our overall funding, which we previously communicated to board. We chose to supplement that CEF funding in order to not pull back staffing that was put into place. And so our accumulated unrestricted surplus has subsidized that differential. We have now submitted our initial ask to ministry for the CEF, and that is what is summarized for you here. So this is comparing what FTE was supported through the Classroom Enhancement Fund in 2018-19 and what we have asked ministry for in 19-20, and the overall difference of 3.244 FTE. We didn't require an increase in our secondary or in our special education, but we did require an additional 3 FTE in our elementary schools, and that was due to looking at the old language and the restored class size composition language and ensuring that where the increase in need was due to additional student enrollment or whether it was due to the restored language. So there was the differential that we had to adhere to and then submit to ministry for the additional funding. Staffing has been put into place with the assumption that that funding will be approved by ministry, and we are hoping that that will take place. We're the 13th of November. We're hoping to hear back soon. That was the 18th of October that was submitted, but so far we've not heard anything to date. So we'll report back on that. Update on new grants received to date. In any given year, board can receive numerous grants from different stakeholders, ministry, and so forth. And these grants are for the particular purpose for which they were applied by whomever applied for them. And so they are essentially targeted. It could be for things like for IEP release, Pro-D resources, supplies, whatever that might be. So on page 15th of 30, I've provided you just a quick list of the grants that we have in the budget to date. As well, wanted to bring to your attention that we have now received confirmation that we are receiving $6,719 of funding, which is actually a credit with Grandin Toy for purchase of menstrual products in support of making products available to our students barrier-free. So not revenue, credit for purchase of product. Average teacher salary. This is something that we monitor closely within the district to ensure that we are not budgeting below or above what our actual costs will be. So with the restored class size and composition language, we did see an influx of teachers to the district, and some were young, some were experienced but had yet to port in their experience to the district, so weren't placed on the appropriate scale. Now that that has all sorted itself out, we are seeing the initial drop in our average teacher salary incline again, and so we have adjusted budget accordingly, and that was to a cost of 1.038 million. I will point out here that special purpose funds must absorb this cost within themselves. So the CEF also, if it's $12 million and X amount of staffing, X amount of remedy, supplies and services, whatever that might be, or learning improvement fund, whatever it is, those salary changes, whether it's QP, whether it's teachers, have to be absorbed within that special purpose fund. So that's just a point. ISE tuition, we have been monitoring our enrollment for ISE and have confirmed now with our 1701 student data collection that what we budgeted, we are seeing 9 less students anticipated at this particular point in time. So we have reduced our overall expected revenue by $125,000. We will, however, be monitoring that very closely over the course of the next few months to see whether or not we'll have an increase in semester 2 over what was anticipated or not, and any further shifts and changes will be presented in the annual amended budget. Rentals and leases, we had reiterated before that that was, that the revenue was lower than it should have been. We wanted to wait until year end to confirm that that was a trend that had continued. We have now increased the budget by $40,000 to better align with what our actuals are. And on the radar, we of course are still awaiting the wrap-up or hopeful negotiations of our teachers bargaining, as well as our funding formula review. These are two unknowns, so they're just something that we're waiting to see what that looks like.
Ms. Sutton, before you go too much further, would you mind if I'm going to give you a question from Trustee Higginson. Yeah.
Questions?
Yeah.
I just wondered, just in case you can't hear me down there, the international student tuition, I noticed that you adjusted the reduction, but what I didn't notice was noted in here was the unintended cost of registering students in, international students in the MSP, which we got a number for. Is that noted somewhere else, or is that part of that $125,000?
There is through the chair, there's a small amount in there. The actual, for the 9 students, we've reduced 121 to 125 just for incremental cost. The MSP piece is yet to be fully determined. That will be reflected in the annual amendment.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and Trustee Stanley.
Thank you. So, through the chair, this is a question about the 1701. Do you want to wait till you're through with all the financial stuff? Okay. So, I need to pull that back up. I guess 2 things. One, and it's all stemming from this, I was struck by the extent to which there appears to be significant, like relatively significant increase over budgeted for students with, or in the levels of, you know, they have of additional or more complex needs. And when I look at the percentages of increase, if I did my math right, they like, so for example, level 1 increased by 13.3%. And whereas EL is increased by about 21%. I'm surprised by those relative increases, relative meaning to the overall increase that we experience in the school district. And so I don't really know which staff I should be looking at, but Carrie's looking at me like my numbers are wrong. Okay. So I guess what, I'm wondering a couple of things is, why is it, if we have any information about why we have, relatively higher increases in those categories of students. If we know anything about that, are these students that are coming into the school district? Do we know if, for example, when we look at what's called special needs, is that just due to increased assessments? That shouldn't be for English language learners. I just got a lot of questions about why it is that those categories have significantly higher levels of change than overall students. And then my secondary group question, which is one question, is do we receive extra funding in the 1701 for those needs, or is it too late for that?
Through the chair, I will endeavor to answer your questions. The special need category, the ELL category, and the Aboriginal education categories are projected very cautiously because the historical data is there's no real rhyme or reason to what we're going to see from one year to the next. It's difficult to determine. So if we say we're going to get the same from last year, but the year before it was a substantial lower amount of an increase and we overproject, then we are going to lose a lot of funding. So we're very careful because, to answer the second part of your question, these categories are in addition to the funding that is the per pupil. So they are also in the per pupil, and then we get this additional funding per each one of these. So if we assume that we're going to have the same numbers as last year, and yet clearly there was a substantial differential this year. If we had overinflated and it went the other direction, that's a massive amount of revenue that would be pulled back. So we're very cautious in those categories because they are over and above those per pupils, which we have a bit more historical data, and we have Beauregard to help us with and so forth. But you're right, with this, with the level 1s, 2s, 3s, the ELLs, that's all dependent on what happens in the classroom, the IEPs, all that happens, and we can't be sure what that looks like from one year to the next.
You may.
Thank you, thank you, I appreciate that. So just to follow up, one, in the sense that I want to understand my understanding, sorry, make sure that I understand you, and two, to follow up on another aspect that wasn't answered. So you're telling me that it's more about cautious prediction rather than changes in the type of students that are enrolling or in our understanding of those students already in the district?
Through the chair, we know the students, so we would look at the designations that would be currently in our system, and then we would look at historical trends, and then we would make a projection based on somewhere that was a reasonable middle ground. This year we have not seen numbers like this. So this is an outlier when it comes to numbers being generated. So I'm not sure why this year is that much bigger. We're going to be looking at that, obviously, when we get to projecting out for next year. But this is a substantial increase that I've not seen before.
And to ask the question that the original one, when we do these 1701 counts, do we get full funding from these numbers? Yes. Thank you.
Ms. Lee, did you have a question?
Through the chair. Just in regards to the English language learning, historically, it seems that there's pockets of these within the school district. I know that it's spreading out, but I'm just curious if the schools that have a high concentration have received extra support with English language teachers, as it puts a huge strain on the school in general.
Through the chair, I would have to refer that to the education side of things. I'm not sure what that looks like at the school level.
Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, thanks. Through the chair, that's an issue we're dealing with presently.
Okay. All right, I'm going to have you continue, Ms. Sutton.
I
Page
believe-
16? Are you
Yeah.
on page 16?
Page 16. So with those shifts and changes, page 16 of 30 is presenting the special purpose revenue and expenditures, and you're seeing the annual budget as approved by the board. You're seeing the overall change, the re-estimated budget, as well as actuals to October 31st. The overall change in revenue is $969,914, and that is made up of $649 increase to the Learning Improvement Fund, an additional $84,500 of after-school sports and arts initiative grant, and the balance of that of $884,765 is the deferred revenue. So those are the balances, the fund balances left over at June 30th last year that are deferred into revenue for use for these special purpose funds this year, and so become part of their overall fund balance. And then important to note actually on the Learning Improvement Fund that when putting this together, and it came up when we were doing the initial GRE in September, that we have yet to receive any funding to date. So reached out to the ministry on that, inquiring as to why, and actually got an answer that was not surprising. We assumed that might be the case. Learning Improvement Fund is in support of our CUPE staff, and with all of the CUPE collective agreements going through ratification right now, they wanted to wait until all 60 school districts had ratified to then flow the money out to the districts. Not 100% sure why that was, but that was the only logical explanation, and they did confirm that for us. So we should see money flowing soon, but it was interesting that we had received nothing to date, so. For our expenses, just to remind the board, we are going through a system refresh. Our HR, finance, and payroll systems are going from an old archaic platform to a new platform, and we just sort of hit the reset button in the last 2 weeks, so timing was a little difficult for putting a lot of this information together, and we're experiencing some serious difficulties in our payroll. Was probably what was impacted most negatively. So we're working through that, and it's coming along well. But that information comes from our HR system, and what we were finding is some of our costing attributed to people in assignments was being put in incorrectly, and by no fault of any staff, it was reverting back to old data for whatever reason. We're working through that. But our support staff and our other professionals, which is a small amount in the special purpose funds, but those two categories we noticed had reverted back to being costed against our operating budget, not the special purpose budget. So in identifying that through this actuals process, there will be some corrective entries that will be made, and then that will be updated and reflected when the actuals are presented in with the amended budget. Our substitute costs, however, is low, and that is a concern for us both in the special purpose and in the operating budget, and predominantly due to our difficulty with filling our EA positions mostly. I know that we've got some difficulties with replacing teachers, but our EAs are a concern, and child and youth workers are also a concern. So that is definitely low, and we are monitoring that. Overall, the other percentages are aligned with where we'd like to be at this particular point in time, and important to note that fund balance in the special purpose will just become balances at the end of the year if they are. It's early in the year at this point, but they just revert back into the fund itself if there is balances at the end of the year.
Trustee Stanley?
I'm wondering if you could teach me, please. I don't understand what percentage, so when we look under, well, I mean, it doesn't matter, percentage collected or spent. I think I just figured it out. So when we're looking at revenues, then it is always percentage, that is always a percentage that has been collected or received, and then when we look under expenses, that has been what has been spent. Okay, so what brought that up to me then was when we're looking at the French programs, I'm wondering if somebody could let me know why we're at, like for me, I want to say only at 14%. I don't know if that is a normal spending pattern or not, but that just stood out to me as a number. I was wondering why we were at that level. Thank you.
I'll let you answer that.
So through the chair, the 14% is the amount of revenue that we have received to date. And actually, we haven't received any of the current year's revenue to date because the contract is still being determined. The 31,778 is the deferred revenue from last year.
Ms. Wood?
Thank you, through the chair. So when you talk about deferred revenue from last year, does that also apply to the Classroom Enhancement Fund? And how much deferred revenue is in that currently?
The Classroom Enhancement, through the chair, the Classroom Enhancement Fund, that is the 481 that you see reflected there. That is the deferred. Now, I will say that we're certain that Ministry will be pulling back a great deal of that, if not all of it.
Thank you.
Okay.
On page, oh, sorry.
Trustee Barron, is it from? Yes, is it from this page? From this, okay.
Are we talking page 16?
Yes, or 16, yeah.
It is from that page. Thank you. Through the chair, I've asked this question before, and I feel like I'm still unclear. Could we please clarify what is included in our school-generated funds? I asked that question because I'm confused around a specific area where it fits. Every time if we could you please clarify what's included in school-generated funds? And then I'll let you know if I have another question.
School-generated funds are all of the items that are collected at the school level in support of students. So PAC, fundraising activities, it's difficult, I'm not at the school level, and yeah, field trips, yearbooks, things like that. So all the money that is collected in for these that is then going to be used for those particular programs that are being run through the schools.
Thank you. Could I follow up?
You may follow up, and then I have a
Thank you, through the chair. The reason I ask is because I think through our transitions, I'm not receiving a clear answer, so maybe you could clarify around where the funds that are coming in through our community schools program is, where it fits on this list.
Community Link, I would guess. Would I be correct in guessing Community Link? Oh,
No, I would probably like to defer that to look into it further for you and make sure that I get back an absolute answer.
Thank you.
If I may?
Thank you.
Okay.
and Ms. McKay, Trustee McKay, did you have something you wanted to add? Okay. All right, so, all right, where are we at? Where are you at now?
At
Sorry about that.
page 17. So same format of information that we're looking at. Now we're looking at the operating fund. And the predominant change in revenue here is what was presented to you in the beginning due to the 1701 data and the increase in student FTE. So this change to the MOE grant is the 2.9 million, as well as the additional grants received by the ministry for those smaller grants to the 2.9 million. As well as previously indicated, we reduced the IIC tuition and increased the rentals and leases, and also received an additional $8,000 for inquiry grants. There is showing a small budgeted deficit here, and that will be mitigated with the annual amended budget because we did not adjust for an increase in per pupil, even though we know that items such as the 2% increase for QP wages will be funded. It's just, it will be forthcoming when the December operating grants are announced, so it wasn't something to really worry too much about at this particular point in time. And the budgeted surplus that is showing is at this particular point due to the differentials of the time that we're receiving our revenue and the expenditures. It's early in the year, so for us to do an accurate forecast at this time, not so appropriate as to get a few more months and be able to come in January, just because of the schedule of some of the revenues that we receive and the difficulties that we see in September with getting positions filled and so forth. So that will come with the annual amended budget forecast, as well as the updates to date. So here, the biggest concern again is our substitute showing under the expenditures as 12%. However, this is compounded by the fact that, again, our operating budget is supplementing the CEF, and our remedy costs are in this substitute amount and are, of course, unspent at this time. So it is adding to the insult of the unfilled EA positions that we are experiencing. So that will be adjusted when the, that amount will change drastically once the remedy is transferred out of operating back into its CEF fund and operating is back onto its own. Other than that, our percentages are much aligned, other than our EAs again, and that clearly shows that we are having difficulty filling positions. So I know HR is working diligently on that.
Is there, put your hand up?
Just on the question around there, because I looked at last year's roughly in the same category, right? And of course, the surplus ran about $4+ million. and I'm looking at the same venue that comes from there. Some of it is 176 additional students, and how that allocation of funding goes out. There is maybe a 19 FTE increase to education assistants, but if I look at the number, there's 71 kids that fit in that category. So ratio-wise, doesn't make sense. That's 1 to 3. If it's in a perfect world. Or 1 to 4. Doesn't fit. So I kind of struggle with that and in on the ratio of what's there. So I do understand we're short of EAs, but I still think that's an area that needs to be looked at more closely.
Thank you. Oh, sure. Trustee McKay.
Through the chair, is it possible for remedy to be held in a separate account from the substitutes so that we can identify the difference in those values?
Through the chair, it's not that it's not in a separate account, it is replacement in how ministry asks us to report information up. It's unfortunately rolled into that. Not to say that we can't provide you with what the figure is amongst that group, if that would be.
Thank you. All right. Anybody else with anything they're confused about before we move forward? All right, back to you.
So page 18 of 30, this is just the summary of the FTE increase overall. Teachers up by 8.267 FTE. Administrative officers and other professionals, as indicated here, they are interlinked, and it's just due to the reorganization of learning services. So it's a reclassification, and those classes hit AOs and other professionals, so they're just interlinked here. Increase in education assistants at 19.008 FTE. Support staff increase of 2.443, so overall we're seeing an increase of FTE out in our district of 30.218. And most of that is operating, as you can see, the 26.238 as opposed to the 3.98 in the special purpose. Yes. Think about that for a minute. CEF is on its own.
Okay.
Questions?
Any other questions? Trustee McKay, sorry. And
Thank
then
you.
Trustee Stanley.
Through the chair, it's just a comment for our finance department to consider. I would just ask that in the future, when we refer to Quam Stu Equal, we use Quam Stu Equal rather than Quam Elementary.
Okay.
Just to be respectful of that relationship that we have.
Thank you.
Will do.
Trustee Stanley?
So thank you. Through the chair to whoever's most appropriate, Ms. Sutton, I think you might be off the hook here. I am noticing at the bottom when we talk about overall changes, and it talks about the demolition of Extension Elementary to the tune of, rounding up $360,000. So if there's a better place to have this conversation, or if we can allocate it later, I just want to highlight or ask or, put up there for conversation that I know that a number of local groups are quite interested in this property, including people from the RDN I've spoken to and the area C director as well. For a number of purposes, but I don't know to whatever extent looking at that property and whether or not we can avoid this cost type scenario has been a conversation or not, and perhaps I recognize maybe we need to have that in the long-range facilities plan, but since it's up here, I just wanted to kind of make sure that was brought up and see if, given that I'm still relatively new here, if there's background information that that would be useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McVeigh? Yeah.
I was just going to add that we received funding for the actual demolition related to the school, given the shape that it is in. And I don't have that funding amount off the top of my head. I'm not too sure if Brian or Tanya does. But with regards to the property itself, sorry, that would be in, should I just continue?
Yeah.
I'm almost done. That would be in respect of what the board chooses to do with all of our facilities and would be dealt with through the long-range facilities plan. Sorry. I'll get this eventually.
Mr. Hackwood might know the price if you're interested. I believe it was.
Through the chair, the majority of the costs of the demolition are hazmat as well. So that building, you can't go into it. And I hate to say, but I believe that it's fully funded, but I hate to say that.
All right, Trustee Barron.
Thank you for the chair. Thank you. I think I've gotten worse this meeting. I don't think you clarified this, but I'm very curious to know what factors have come into play that have resulted in an increase in anticipated rentals and leases income of 40,000. What has, perhaps this is another conversation, but just at a superficial level, that increase there, could you speak to that?
We increased it just because that is what we're showing as overall revenue, and our budget has been low. As far as the actual items, I would have to circle back.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Sutton.
Thank you.
All right. So, next item, heading number 9, correspondence from the regular board meeting. Item 9.1, we have a letter from a group of parents regarding lead in the water. The letter had a request from the board, and we need to, as a board, determine how we wish to move forward with this correspondence. So, does anyone have any thoughts? Help me out here, guys. I wasn't it. Trustee Keller.
Thank you. Thank you. Just looking at the letter, there's, just briefly, it looks like there's 3 requests. So I'm assuming that the authors are looking for responses on these things. Just reading them, there's some suggestions. Dismantling some water fountains, continuing with daily flushes, and installing at least 4 additional water filling stations. That aside, I think from my perspective, learning what I know now from the presentation that we had today, just a thought, I would like to see some additional communications get posted in our schools in a way that students can understand what to do, and until such time as we get the data updated and we have a plan in place to see what's required to meet the new standard.
Okay. Hold on, Trustee Higginson, Trustee McKay, and then Trustee Barron. Oh, sorry, Trustee O'Neill and then Trustee Higginson.
Okay, thank you. I was going to actually move a motion to refer this back to our regular meeting.
Okay. Do we have a seconder?
Sorry, as a point of process, any recommendation that the business committee makes will automatically go to the regular board meeting at the end of the month.
Okay.
Thanks for that clarification.
Okay. So, Trustee Higginson, what were you going to suggest?
Thank you. Just a couple of questions on this correspondence. It's on. Yep. Has staff responded to this letter already? At all? No. So I would like to suggest that our staff respond. I don't need this to be a motion yet, but my suggestion, because I know there's other people on the speakers list, would be that our staff respond to the letter writers and specifically addressing their requests. And we've done a ton of work on this in the district, and in the past, the program that we undertook was extremely comprehensive and was filled with very good communication to any school that requested it and wanted it. And I think that in this case, we have people who are concerned about the health of their children, and I think it's really important for us to make sure that we make sure the school community feels comfortable. And so I'd like to, once we finish this conversation, I think something that we should think about doing is referring this to staff for a response and making sure the board is provided with a copy of that response so we know then what is happening in the schools in regards to this specific request.
Okay.
It'll help just with that standardized communication, I think, that Trustee Keller is talking about. It helps us know what opportunities we have and suggestions we have to provide to other folks who may bring this up to us in the community.
Great. Thank you. Trustee Barron.
Thank you. Through the chair, Through the chair, thank you. I do agree with the comments that were made around moving forward in referring this to staff. I do think that the areas that are being discussed in this letter are very much the work of our staff. As far as comments around us ensuring that our students are educated, although I do feel that it is important that our students are educated, of course, I feel like more importantly for me is that we are doing the work that needs to be done, which I trust our staff are doing, to ensure that our students are not drinking unsafe drinking water. I don't know if, I think that work is already being done to ensure that's happening. I don't know of instructions for our students. I'm just trying to think here that, if we're ensuring that the water is safe, our students don't need to do anything. And so, I'm not sure if us as a board need to recommend that we provide better education or instructions to our students when the water should just be safe for them to drink up in front of them. So I'm just trying to delicately go around that, I guess. But I do agree this needs to go to staff, and I would like to see a staff response.
Okay, Trustee Stanley.
So thank you through the chair. Yes, I would as well like to see a staff response to this letter. This seems to be a continuing, ongoing issue in our general school community, and I'm wondering if we could consider ways that we could communicate somehow, whether that's, I think somebody mentioned that there was a tab on the website or something, but something along those lines where the community could just go and click or see that this issue is being dealt with, again, once we receive these test results, because we're kind of still waiting for that information, but as well to report out on whether, if any, there are requirements for ongoing testing, so that they also know that it's not just now, but that this issue will be handled in the future.
All right. Anyone else want to make a comment before I ask for a formal trustee, Ms. Lee?
Thank you through the chair. May I just ask Brian, at the schools that have had the flush system installed, are you saying that it flushes it so the water is safe from that point on?
Through the chair, the lead is when it goes stagnant over the weekend generally is when the lead leaches into the pipes. So flushing it on Monday morning gets that lead water out of the pipe. It's then below the Canada Safe Drinking Water Guidelines.
Thank you.
Okay, Trustee Higginson.
I'll just move that staff respond to this letter and provide the board a copy of their response.
Seconder? Okay, all in favor? All right, carried. I think, was it? Yeah. Was Trustee Higginson and Trustee Stanley? Yeah. All right, next item is, my apologies, NDTA correspondence regarding formal employee recognition. So we have a letter here from the NDTA requesting that we consider an employee recognition program. Does anyone wish to, again, I'm a little remiss in that I was not at the last meeting, so I am not sure what discussion was had about this so far. So basically, we need a recommendation to the board as to how we want to proceed with this letter as well. Trustee Keller? Or I'm not sure, so you have to help me out here, but I'll get with trustee. Yeah, okay, you take it, Ms. McKay.
The correspondence was referred to the business committee in order to have a discussion on whether or not the board wanted to move forward. with
Okay,
this.
thank you, I couldn't remember. Okay, so, that's the question then. So, Ms. Wood?
I just want to point out that this letter, while it was written by myself and it's on NDTA letterhead, is a recommendation coming from the trustee teacher liaison committee.
Okay.
Of which there are 3 trustees and 1 senior management and 4 NDTA members. So it's a
Thank you.
joint recommendation.
Thank you, and I appreciate the reminder about that. Mr. Zverin, then Ms. Barron. Trustee Barron.
Thank you, through the chair. Although we didn't write a letter, I think in the past, the boards have asked about bringing back recognition in a way. There was a committee that was supposed to be formed under, and it was back when Superintendent, I'll try to get the right name, just before John came in, I think was even part of it.
Mr.
Hutchinson, and I think even Monroe, when he was in. There were some discussions about bringing it back, and it just kind of got left behind. And in all fairness, for what you can do and recognize people for their years of services, it's a small thing, but goes a long ways.
I'm going to just ask you a follow-up question on that comment. When you say bring it back, what is your recollection of what existed in the past? And when?
In the past, there used to be pins, there used to be letters, there used to be stuff that went to people that had long-term services.
Okay.
We went just to finalize because of cutbacks, we went to just a retirement thing. But there used to be that. And they would come, they would get a pin, they would get a small something gift, but whatever it was, some of them just got papers that said thank you for your service. But there was stuff done, and it just went away.
All right, Trustee Barron, then Trustee McKay, and then Trustee Keller.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification on process, first of all. Is our intention to discuss whether this is something as a board that we want to implement? I guess is my first question.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Can we be provided with some information around what is currently, microphone. Can I have some information around what is currently in place as far as recognizing our service employees, as far as, or recognition length of service, around recognizing the length of service of employees, what's currently in place for us to do so, and also what is currently in place for us to recognize trustees?
Okay, I'll ask Mr. Snell.
Through the chair, for staff, there is no formal recognition for service until they retire. For trustees, it's based on years of service. So we would recognize trustees. I can't remember what they get after so many years, a plaque after 5 years or something, but we'd recognize after, in a sense, we recognize trustees when they retire as well. So when their term is over, that's when we recognize them.
And I would just add that the piece around trustee recognition came up last term, and it was sort of, I think, triggered in part by the passing of long-term retired trustee June Harrison. Died early in our term, and there was some desire to acknowledge that, which led to a wider discussion, which led to now the AP we have around board recognition. Did you want to speak to that? Or it's in our note, it's in our paper. No, is it not? Thought I saw it.
Sorry, I'm going to have to get used to the microphone. The AP essentially for trustee recognition has various levels. So 1 to 2 completed terms, acknowledgement certificate, 3 or more completed terms, a trustee will receive a pin for the duration of their time. On the board, trustees with more than 3 completed terms will receive a pin that corresponds with their most recent completed term. And then for 4 to 5 completed terms, individual photo and bio in trustee's album. If the trustee is elected for another term, this information will be updated at the end of the term. And then 6 or more completed terms, commemoration plaque and photo and bio, and the plaque must be first nominated by the board of the day and will be displayed on a designated wall in the boardroom. So there's essentially, it's with regards to the number of terms.
All right, thank you. Trustee McKay.
Thank you. Through the chair to the committee. So I guess I have a couple of thoughts that I would share. First, so the board has traditionally recognized all employees for their service at the time of their retirement, which we heard from Superintendent Saywell. And for me, I look at recognizing the retirement of a trustee at the end of their term is similar to that, because we run on an election cycle, and so when a trustee finishes their term, it's an acknowledgement of that service, not knowing whether or not they come back. And so it's kind of like a retirement acknowledgement in my mind. And so I do equate that to being similar to recognizing the length of service of our staff members as well, because we do that on an annual basis upon their retirement at the end of the year during those celebrations. And so I'm at this point in time, I'm not in favor of putting in an additional program other than acknowledging the service upon retirement. And I would be happy to see our AP updated to reflect recognition of retired employees not being done until an election cycle is complete. Perhaps that they only get recognized once, as opposed to every 4 years if they keep running again and again. But that's a separate issue. I just think that they should align and be similar. But that's my thoughts on this for now.
Trustee Keller, and then Trustee Stanley, and then Trustee Higginson.
Thank you, through the chair. I guess I have a little bit different perspective on this. I fully support recognition of the long service of our employees. I think that it's consistent with our strategic plan goal of creating a safe, caring, and healthy learning and working environment that's inclusive of the diversity of entire learning community. So I think it's actually a way that we can support our strategic goal. And I think it's important for all of our staff to feel welcomed and valuable part of the team. So I do support establishing some form of long-term recognition, and I would entertain the idea of requesting a report from staff with some potential options.
Okay, Trustee Stanley.
So thank you, through the chair. I too am in favor. I think it's important to say thank you and to have gratitude in longstanding relationships. So I would be in favor of perhaps a letter or some form of honoring of long-term service at major markers, whether that starts at 10 or 15 or 20, I'm not sure, but that's not for me to decide. I would not be in favor of stuff, simply from sustainability perspective, that more things and things produced are not actually good for the environment. So I would rather just that we go with an appreciation and an acknowledgement of that long-standing relationship that we receive from our individual staff members.
All right, Trustee Higginson, and then Trustee Wilkinson.
Thank you. So, I'm not opposed to this at all but I'm not ready to say yes or no at this point. I am in favor of hearing more from staff. I think other districts do it, and I've heard really good things about it. I know one of the reasons why it did get cut here was because of costs associated when we were in a different time. But one of the things that I would also like to understand, one is costs to what are other districts doing, but also, in honoring our CAETSAS, understanding what the traditional practices of the land that we're on in recognizing this type of service for people. And I think that would be also an important piece of information for me to understand as well, to be woven into any report we have back.
All right, Trustee Wilkinson and then Trustee Robinson.
Thank you, through the chair. So I'm not opposed to it either. I mean, I always think it's great to recognize people. I guess my question too would just be around the logistics of it all, because, you know, being a school district employee, I know there's times when is it, you know, when you start as a full-time employee, when you start, you know, because there's the whole, if you're, you know, laid off, or if you're off on mat leave, or parental leave, all of those things. Just kind of the logistics of it all, because I know, you know, people will say, well, I'm getting my 10-year recognition, but I've actually been working for the school district for 12 years, or it might not be the school district, but another, you know, another employer.
Okay, Trustee Robinson.
Yes, I too support some kind of recognition at markers. I don't think tonight's the night for us to decide what those markers are. I would like to see this referred to staff and have them come back with some recommendations, including costs.
Okay.
Are you moving that?
I am moving that motion.
I will second that motion.
Okay, any further discussion, particularly from Trustee O'Neill? You haven't spoken yet. I haven't spoken yet. You go first.
I'll speak in support of that. I mean, I've got a number of things written down here, but essentially I think, you know, just making sure this is on, hearing from our staff what the past practice has been, what that looks like, how that could look down the road. I think we need more information. I'm also mindful that this is from the Teacher Liaison Committee and not doesn't involve other employees in the district, so I think that we should be looking at all aspects of the district. Sorry?
It just says employees.
Oh, does it? Okay, sorry. Apologies. Yeah, and I mean, you know, I am in support of the idea of this, but ultimately it's not a decision that I'm going to make tonight, so I support the motion to move this for a staff recommendation.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just also going to say the same, that I also support that we recommend this, that the board recommend, that we move that we make, I support the motion. Sorry, as I trip on my words. Trustee Keller and Trustee Higginson, I have you on the speakers list still. Is there anything else that?
Clarification, are we in a motion?
We are in a motion. Yeah. Trustee Keller, did you have anything you wanted to add? Because you were.
I was going to move a motion, but
Okay, it's done.
understand that we have a motion on the floor.
Okay. And are you, okay. All right, so any further discussion on the motion? No. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. All right. All right. Motion is passed. Anything further on this that needs to be? Okay, good. All right, we're going to move forward. I believe Ms. McVeigh, yes. And Director of Finance, okay. Our unfinished business regarding surplus and local capital.
This information sheet was put together subsequent to the financial statements being provided to the board and the request for the 1.25 to be transferred from operating surplus to local capital in support of the Hamma Bay expansion. And with that decision put off for now until further notice or review, wanted to update the documentation as to what the accumulated surplus looked like from what it had been originally presented. So this was just a high-level summary of where it stands right now, and some supporting historical looks at where our surplus has been, and a bit of a local capital summary for board's information. And wanting just basically to open it up to the board for questions if they so choose to ask any related to the information provided.
Questions, anybody? Ms. Wood?
So I'm just, kind of fixated on the CEF. And so there's a CEF supplement here of 1.7 million, and that's surplus. And earlier we spoke about the 481,000 that was deferred from last year. So are we saying that there's $2,200 in unspent CEF, and some of it is rolled over into this year, and some of it is sitting there in surplus?
Through the chair, no, the deferred, so ministry had provided $12 million, whatever, sorry, I don't have the actual number in front of me right now, for the Classroom Enhancement Fund for 18-19. And unspent amounts were rolled into this year. That is aside from the current budget year and the amount that the support teacher, administrative staff, etc., is budgeted for. And because ministry only provided us with 90% of that funding, we have subsidized that fund up to what it should have been had ministry provided the entire Classroom Enhancement Fund. So we have to leave the deferred revenue where it is for now until ministry decides whether or not they're going to pull that back, which we believe they will. And once ministry confirms what our classroom enhancement funding is for this year, inclusive of remedy, which is being submitted at the end of this month, then we'll know what that full amount is, and this subsidy will just be reverted back into surplus because it's unnecessary. It's just a placeholder.
The 1.7 million?
Yes.
Ms. McVeigh?
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Sort of,
Okay.
thanks.
Ms. McVeigh, were you going to answer me?
I was going to add something. Sorry, I'm just trying to collect my thoughts for a moment. I'm not sure if we answered Ms. Wood's questions completely. So I think there might have been a question around does CEF roll into the next year? And that is not the case unless it's monies that's been committed but hasn't been distributed. So, but perhaps I misunderstood your question. It sounded like you were asking if the ministry will only give us the CEF money that we require. So if they provide us with more funding than what we actually require, they would pull that back.
Mm-hmm.
This really slows things down. That's not entirely what I'm asking. I'm asking how the 1.7 million in the surplus is related to the almost $500,000 in the deferral on page 16. Yeah.
It's not related.
It's not, and it's not related.
No, because the deferred revenue is an 18-19 year-end balance, and that is our unspent balance. And ministry, like I say, most likely will pull that back. But the actual amount that we are going to, that we are requesting and that we are looking at what our costs will be for this year is being determined by the ask that we submitted to ministry and will be the 100%. This 1.7 was the differential between the 90% that they actually gave us up front when they should have actually given us our normal rollover.
Okay.
They convoluted the entire process basically for the sector by doing what they did. Instead of just normally saying, like every year, your learning improvement fund is 485, your link is 2.2. They don't do that with any other fund. They said in this case, we're only going to give you a portion of what your actual costs are. Figure it out. Some districts may very well have cut staff back. Some may have just said we're just going. I don't really know. It was a very last minute scenario. No one was really expecting that. So having them say you only get 90%
Right.
posed that challenge, so.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Trustee McKay, do you have a question, or was it related to something else? Okay.
Thank you. Through the chair, if Director Sutton could just confirm that, once we receive our CEF funds this year, then the monies held in that account would then revert back to our targeted staffing constraints?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right. Seeing none, anything else, Ms. Sutton, that you wanted to add, or, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, our final item on the agenda is draft 2.7, policy development. We do have a recommendation from the policy committee, but we will need a motion. But before we get into making a motion, is there any questions or anything anybody would like to bring up regarding this proposal? Trustee Keller.
Thank you through the chair. Just like to thank the committee for the work they put into the draft. I'm just wondering how we might best provide feedback, given our sort of meeting structure doesn't really provide us with opportunity to go through in detail. So is there a way for us to do that?
Oh, probably because you're the board chair, so I'm wondering if you have anything in mind that you would like, that ways that trustees could give more detailed feedback? That might be longer, might take more time than this meeting would be.
Well, I guess the question then would be returned back to the board. Does the board want to go through the policy line by line to confirm that that's what we want from it? Or is the board satisfied to send the draft to consultation, allow the consultation comments to come in as well as trustee comments come in, and then the policy would take all of that into consideration for a final revision to bring back to the board? I think that's what we envisioned.
Okay.
By bringing it to the committee and offering this opportunity to start there. I believe that was our intention.
Okay, so your intention would then, so I make sure that I understand, that there would be an opportunity for, when it's out for consultation, there would still be an opportunity for trustees to also provide detailed input. Trustee Higginson?
Thank you. I'm just wondering from the policy committees, if I could hear if this has been reviewed by legal. I have questions and concerns specifically related to the number of times it says may and shall, which are very unclear. And I'm concerned that long-term, with those mays and shalls and shoulds even, not will, or just taking those words out, or timely, what that will lead to if there's a questioning of differing interpretation of that. Has this been looked over by legal to determine whether those words can lead to differing interpretations down the line, and if so, what happens?
Anybody from the committee want to speak to that?
Just to answer the question, no, it has not been looked over by legal, and I guess it begs further question, to what extent do we want to send every policy for legal feedback? It's just not necessarily a point of contention with the question, but just for further consideration at a later point in time. So answer no.
Okay. Trustee Higginson, I'll give you, is this a follow-up?
I'll tie it in.
Yes, please.
Has this been reviewed by the CAETSS or put through a lens of CAETSS?
No.
To answer your question again, no. Perhaps.
Beginning of it's one of the steps, I think.
Okay, Trustee Keller, and then I'll.
Do you want me to add more to that?
Yes,
Should I
please.
expand on that?
Yes,
Sorry,
please.
I kind of cut you off.
Yeah, no, I was just going to explain the process.
Okay.
But I think that it might be, Trustee McKay might be able to be elaborating on the exact question, which might be more relevant at this time.
Okay, I'll ask you to do that then, Trustee McKay.
So the answer is no, it hasn't gone there yet. But certainly that's a consideration in the next 30 days for us to seek that feedback, as we would any other move that we make, I think.
Okay.
It just hasn't been done as of yet.
Okay, Trustee Keller?
Thank Thank you. So, I mean, through the chair, we're here discussing the policy on policy development, just so everyone's clear on that. And we're having discussions on how we should develop the policy. So, to me, in my view, before we go to the public, we need to be clear what the role of individual trustees is in providing feedback. And to me, I think it's important to get that feedback before we go to public consultation. So I'll leave that at my comments, and I would hope that we would be able to provide individual feedback and refine the policy before we go to public.
Okay. Trustee Higginson?
Thank you. I support what Trustee Keller just said because I have a number of concerns with the way it's written, and that it will lead to, and it's not the intent of it. I like what it's trying to say, and it does say, but I do have concerns with some of the wording in it. And there is a couple of lines that I think maybe are confusing. At one point, it says the superintendent is responsible for developing, implementing, approving, and evaluating administrative procedures. And then it says the board must also be informed about and evaluate administrative procedures in another section. So, and then further to my point about CAET says, what I would like to see in our policy development policy, or policy on policy development, is how we will be bringing, I think I personally as a trustee, and knowing where we have placed CAET within our strategic plan, that it needs to be explicit in our policy development policy where we will include the bringing together of the two ways of knowing and being that we're trying to under CAET. I think that's really important to do, and I think it needs to be explicit in there how our knowledge keepers would like that to happen when we are developing new policy. So I support what Trustee Keller said, that I think there's still a step that needs to happen before it goes out to the public for consultation, because my concern is, while we could simply provide our feedback now, my specific concern around CAET I feel may change the policy so much so that it would no longer be sort of like, it's like an amendment, no longer be germane to the original. It's not just those shalls and mays, it's really actually trying to implement something that's meaningful and recognizing that and the importance of that in our policy development, that it would just cause us to have to redo this, because I think it wouldn't necessarily be germane anymore.
Anyone else wish to speak? Trustee Barron, because you haven't spoken yet, and then Trustee Stanley.
Thank you, through the chair. I appreciate trustees' feedback around this policy on policy development. We've spent quite a bit of time just trying to build the foundation around this. So as you can empathize, I'm sure this is a big task that's kind of building the foundation around how we move forward. So really appreciate some of these additional thoughts. We did anticipate that we hadn't thought of it all. And so I really do appreciate. We had thought about bringing forward the recommendation as listed in the agenda of it going to public consultation and then including all recommendations through that process. Me personally, I'm not speaking on behalf of policy committee. I'm open to the idea of a change in that process if that is the will of the board, for us to pool trustees' recommendations, sit down and look at implementing those recommendations into the policy and then bringing it back for another motion of putting it forward for the 30-day consultation. So I guess that if that's the will of the board, I want to put that out there. That's something that the policy committee can do. We're just trying to get it moving forward, and getting that feedback is important.
And I would also agree that I would like to see CAET feedback before it goes to the public, so that's integrated first, so that we know that we're committed to that. Trustee, pardon? Okay, well, Trustee O'Neill first, and then Trustee Keller, because he's spoken.
Okay, thank you, through the chair. So I I want to thank the committee for putting this together and taking those first steps. And, I don't disagree with some of the sentiments I hear that, perhaps we could take a bit more time to review this. And, but one thing I always appreciate about being at the committee meetings like tonight is that we have our stakeholders, some of our stakeholders here at the table with us who have had an opportunity hopefully to review this, and I would like to hear from them, if they're willing, some of the feedback that they may be thinking.
Okay. Miss Wood, Mr. Zver, Miss Lee, any of you like to be on the list? I'll give you a minute. I've missed Trustee Stanley. Yeah. I just
To point, to be clear, I don't want to put anyone on the spot
why.
either.
Yeah.
I just want to make a point that specifically if we're going to have opportunity as trustees to
Absolutely.
speak further to this,
Yeah.
I want to make sure that, I hear from some of the voices I
I
don't
hear
hear
you,
from.
and I agree
Thank
with you, because I think it's important that we reiterate to other members of this committee that they are welcome to speak as well, because we don't often always hear from everybody. So Trustee Stanley, though?
So thank you to the chair. So I want to make a comment. Before that, I just want to provide some background information, so perhaps that would have been useful to start with. So this is a learning process. The process that we went through to arrive at what is before you now is that we looked at a number of different school districts and their development policy. We particularly targeted school districts that are known for having gone through their policies, through their policies, or known for being well-functioning school districts, for lack of a better term. So in pulling those number of different policy development policies from other school districts who are known for policy, we looked at A, what was written, and B, what were the general categories. So, what are they saying, and in the way that they're saying it, and what are they covering as far as topics go. And so that's what led to this aspect of it. As you see now, we talked about generally what policy should do, what's the function, talked generally about our process, and roles, and then broke it down to the categories of implementation and evaluation. Development, implementation, evaluation, and included what, when we looked at informing policy, what is considered good process or good criteria for following policy. What was also included, that was a general search of policy organizations and what they propose to be good policy. So that, I think, is an important piece of information about how we arrived at this particular document. Whoa, the SAYETSIS thing. Okay, so that's huge. And all of a sudden now I'm thinking that does require a legal perspective, because I don't know to what extent that there's an implication for an elected board to put forward policy and then review it or get feedback from a non-elected body. I have no idea. So I am now coming full circle for Trustee Higgins' original comments that maybe there are some legal implications that we need to look at when we're talking about developing policy. As much as we, being one of the members of the policy committee, and having put this forward based on, what we thought was fairly extensive consultation or review of other information, I don't think that we should be putting it forward for consultation, because I think that that's a big question. And I think that's one that we need to explore and get a better understanding about how to move forward on that. So, yeah. That's big. So I guess I'm going to suggest that we don't put forward this recommendation.
Okay, Ms. Lee, was your hand up? Okay.
Thank you, through the chair. As always, I don't think I've ever seen anything that's gone out public consultation and not come back completely different. that's the point. You get, rather than 12 different views, you get, you know, upwards of 20, 30,000 different views if people decide to engage and participate in the consultation. So I always find that in the interest of moving things forward rather than not moving things forward and putting more work on people that are already overworked, just move it forward.
Anything further anyone would like to add? Mr. Trustee Keller, were you back on the list? I had you on the list. Do you still want to speak? Okay.
Thank you for all the comments that we've heard from the committee. I'm just, in terms of process, my question more than anything is if it's the committee's wish to provide opportunity for more feedback, what is the process? Do we need a motion? Do we not pass the recommendation that was suggested?
We haven't even moved it yet.
What maybe through the chair to staff, what do you recommend?
Well, again, it could be done one of two ways. If the board wanted to get additional feedback before it going forward to consultation, that what we've seen done in the past is that information all get collected by the policy committee. All get collected by the policy committee by a certain date, and then it could come back, or as it has. Is this on?
Yep.
I just turned it off. Or again, to move it forward, there's that 30-day period of consultation where all that feedback can be obtained from other trustees and the general public. So that might be a more efficient way of going about it.
Okay, I've got Ms. Wood, and I've got Trustee Stanley, and then I've got Trustee O'Neill, and then Mr. Zver. Ms. Wood.
Just briefly, thank you, Chair. If you're looking for input, I thought that it was lovely to read that policies would be readily available and accessible, because I find them extremely difficult to search to find what you're looking for. So if we're going to be making that update, that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Trustee Stanley, and then Trustee O'Neill.
So I'm responding to Trustee Keller's question because I think at this point in time, I mean, my thoughts are this, you know, to be frank, the Say It's This policy is a new way of thinking about things. And I think that that is a learning experience. And I think that right now, this is a learning experience in how we are going to incorporate that into our processes. That requires a bigger conversation than this. So I think that we have, through this process, and through a commitment to think differently, have realized that we didn't think differently, and that we need to talk about and figure out how we're going to think differently. So I don't think that we're ready for feedback, because I think what we've just had is a bit of a, okay, we're doing things differently. We need to figure out how it is that we're going to do that. That's a big conversation. So I think that as a board, we need to figure out a time about, we've approved the policy, the Say It's This policy, but I don't know that we've talked about implementing that. And I think that if that is indeed foundational, as what we've said, that we need to back up and have that conversation first, because it's quite possible that we didn't remain true to that intent.
Okay, Mr. Zver, because he had his hand up, and then Trustee Higginson and Trustee Barron. If I missed any other hands. Okay.
Thank you. Through the chair, to the people that were thinking about the policy development, I'm not sure what the urgency is, because it seems that what you're doing now is working. I think in a way that this states it makes it harder for things to get done through motions of the board, and may tie other trustees coming in hands that will just rewrite it and take the policies back out. Because your direction, your goals, and your strategies may not exist 3 years down the road. But policies that are written, and it's by guidance through this, may make them harder to try to move, try to eliminate, or try to even change them dramatically as time changes. We're learning from that. We're evolving all the time and changing our directions. And policies need to be free and flowing and not tangled up. And I think this actually makes it harder for a policy to be written and drafted in a 30-day mark. You send it out for consultation, you get back what you need, and then you guide by the people. But I read this and I keep going, this actually makes it harder for people to see a policy coming through.
Okay, Trustee Higginson.
Thank you. I really support oh, look at you, I'm getting you, already getting you elected for the next term. But Mr. Beer just said in terms of, making sure that we're not making something more difficult than it needs to be. I do just want to circle back around to Trustee Stanley's comments on CASS, and I think it's true, like, we are stubbing our toe because this is a way of thinking differently, and we have to constantly remind ourselves to do it. I do think it's important to note, though, that CASS is being implemented in many ways across the district, including with us hiring the CASS, thank you. And I think it's actually, to your point, that it's the board who needs to do the work on where it fits into our work, because there's a lot of very good work already happening in the district on it. So I just felt it was important to say that, it's not that CASS isn't being implemented, it's that we maybe haven't done the right amount of work necessary on how we want to implement it in our work. And I think that's really important. I also think it's important feedback that we just heard from one of our QP stakeholder at the table. Thank you.
Trustee Barron, Trustee McKay.
Thank you. Another process question.
Mm-hmm.
Through the chair, we have a recommendation that's been brought forward to the board. We do not want to move this recommendation and want to go forward in a different way. What do? What's our steps? We just don't move it, and then we just continue to work.
Yeah, that would be my.
Can I recommend that you do that?
After, you don't need to, because you just don't move the recommendation. Trustee McKay.
Thank you. Through the chair, to the committee, I think, and in particular to trustees, I think actually some of this discussion leads me back to our terms of reference, because we haven't clearly outlined how we will bring back policies to the board for input and what those steps might look like. And that might be a conversation that we need to have for future, because we have a lot of work that's been lined up in front of us. And so I think we need to figure out what that process is as well, alongside of coming back and taking in the input we've heard today. I think that we might need to revisit those terms to have a clear indicator for the rest of the board to know how we'll bring it back to them, or what steps they would like us to take before we make a recommendation. That might be a piece of work that we need to do.
Okay. Any further comments, questions? Okay, so since we're not making a recommendation tonight, I would imagine there's nothing we really need to do at this point other than let you know that you guys can go back to work, continue working. Okay. All right. Thank you to the Policy Committee for this update, and we look forward to seeing the next iteration of this when you're ready. All right. Okay, next item on the agenda is, we've done that, new business, we have none. Do we, no FYIs. Do we have any questions from anyone? All right.
Two questions, both related to the agenda, and these people would like to ask their questions
Okay.
themselves, so they can maybe.
Awesome. We've got Neil, am I reading, Goller? Geller? Goller?
Ms. Matthews will bring the report to you.
And there you go.
Am I supposed to stand here? All right. I have a lot of questions after that, but I had to settle on one. So, Mr. Heckwood stated that the filling stations are actually not filtered, although we understood that they were. and that there was a nominal cost, 150 some odd dollars every 1.5 months or so, and that this was not a manageable cost. Our understanding is, after discussions with our principal at Hammond Bay, which is where our kids are, she spends an hour every day in the morning when she shows up flushing all the water fountains in the school. We have a rough estimate of cost, because her salary is posted online, in excess of $10,000 a year to do this flushing. I'm not exactly sure why this is seen as a good use of school resources, and that we're diverting our staff to these sorts of jobs for building maintenance and not doing filtration. So right now, our students are drinking from those fountains preferentially because they are understood to be filtered, and the parents are directing them there. And so in this
Yeah,
case,
sure. So your question then is?
why are we not proceeding with filtration in these fountains and the proper communication as to where the students can safely drink?
Okay. I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to look
Do I
at
return
staff.
this?
Pardon? Pardon? Anything? Yeah, we probably, I would say we would need time to get back. We would need some time to get staff to send you an answer for that.
Okay,
So
thank
we'll
you.
just, yeah.
Make sure that you provide the paper to.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And next question?
My name is Anya Dunham. I'm also a parent at Hammond Bay Elementary, and I drafted the letter that was discussed under item 9.1. Thank you for discussing it today. So my question also has to do with the clarification around remediation. So our school has 60% of water sources above the new limit. If you look at the 2017 testing, and you look at the new limit, and you look at the results post-flush, we still have water sources that are above the new limit. In addition, there really is no safe lead concentration in water. So what the Health Canada is putting forward is the minimum recommended. But really, there is no safe lead concentration in
question?
water. Yes, it's
Yeah.
coming.
Yeah.
So the point is, our children are drinking contaminated water. At our
Question?
school, we have no automated flushing.
As a point of order, yeah.
I would ask, so we actually need you to ask a question.
Yes.
today.
Yeah, sorry.
And you have to kind of stop giving us your background information. We simply need your question. as a
Okay,
point of our
so what is this board going to do to stop the children from drinking contaminated water while this process of testing and looking at the numbers takes place?
Okay. I think that we will have to direct this to staff, because this is a matter of Ms. McVeigh? You're on.
The only thing I thought I could add to that is your letter has been referred to staff for response, I believe, and so staff will do that. I can also comment that we are following the guidelines and working with the ministry and with Island Health. So it's our understanding that we are acting within the requirements that we're required to do. So again, actively working with Island Health and both the ministry.
So I understand I have one more clarifying question that I can ask, is that correct? And it's around the timing. So I do understand that there is a process in place, but children are drinking from the fountains. And so how do we stop it from happening now?
Well, I think that we've established tonight that we are going to have staff make sure that they follow up on this, and that we will deal with it as quickly as, I'm going to look.
No, well, we're meeting the requirements.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what we're doing for testing.
Yeah.
Presently.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And those requirements have been determined to be the appropriate course of action. I don't really want to let that comment go that children are drinking unsafe water. So just to reiterate, we are acting within the guidelines that we've been provided for with both the ministry and Island Health.
All right. Seeing no further questions, I'm going to call for a motion to adjourn. Trustee Barron? Trustee McKay, all in favor?